Let's talk about the IPOs that are going on. It's been pretty amazing to see the world we grew up in over the last decade where nobody would go public. Airbnb and Uber taking their time, Yuri Milner and everybody else throwing late stage money, don't go public. And then lo and behold, my bestie Chamath and now Reid Hoffman and Mark Pincus and everybody else is doing SPACs. And now there is a way to get public quicker. You did Open Door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And was that with Chamath or?
Yeah, so Chamath and Adam Bain really worked on bringing Open Door into their SPAC, which is a transaction that hasn't technically closed, but you can sort of see the market cap, because you can buy shares in the holding. Yeah, IPOB. It should close hopefully next week, and it's been a very successful experience, both working with Chamath and Adam, and then B, just the public market reaction. I think as of today, we're probably valued at like 13, 14 billion. So Chamath got a great deal at 5.
Yeah. And when you go through this process, I don't want to talk specifically about anything that would get you in trouble, but just talking about the SPAC process, putting aside Open Doors process, just SPACs in general, keep you out of trouble. Make sure you don't disclose anything you're not supposed to, but tell us about the process and the window of companies that it's best suited for rather than a direct listing like, say, Spotify did, or waiting like Uber and Airbnb did, like waiting 11 years.
So let me start with first principle. First principle is I think waiting was always terrible advice. Is one of the worst pieces of advice that anybody in Silicon Valley has given for the last 15 years. And fortunately, some of the companies I've been involved in didn't listen to that advice. I think realistically, only Bill Gurley and me were like sitting publicly critiquing the people dispensing this advice. I believe strongly that companies should go public almost as fast as possible. I wrote a whole chapter in a book that I highly recommend to founders called High Growth Handbook, published by Eli Gill. The whole entire chapter is why to go public as fast as possible, and why everybody who doesn't do that is like really sacrificing their company's potential. But that was a controversial view. Fortunately, in the last 6 months, it's become a very conventional view. SPACs are a process really for companies that suddenly realized that Keith and Bill Gurley were right and hadn't really prepared for a traditional IPO, whether an IPO or direct listing. And they wanted to accelerate the process and find a way to do that. A SPAC can be a good vehicle to accelerate the process where the management team hadn't really prepared properly. That isn't the really best feature of a SPAC, truthfully. The best feature of a SPAC at the end of the day is that legally, for a hardcore technology company that's really innovating on a deeply technical solution, they can guide years into the future about the revenue potential of the business. Whereas through an S1 process or a traditional IPO process, it's extremely legally precarious / virtually impossible to guide future years' revenue. And so as a result of that, if you have a breakthrough technology that will have a market, it's much better in many ways to be able to convince and articulate the market size to potential investors through a SPAC process than you would be able to do in a traditional IPO. Now, that said, it's not that different than a private fundraising. People have always done this in private fundraisings. So when people pitch us at Founders Fund, even when they're reinventing a rocket or reinventing manufacturing space, reinventing genetic sequencing, they're talking about the revenue potential in the slides in the presentation. So this is very similar to what you'd see in a private fundraising process. It's just now possible to do it publicly.